Hey guys, Mr. Bostic here. Welcome back to Medieval History. It's time for us to jump on into Chapter 11, the Medieval Holy Roman Empire. And as you see with the quote here, there's a historical quip that it's neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. We'll talk about that later. But first, let's go ahead and jump on in. And as usual, let's get started with the map. I mean, it's true to say that in the modern world, and I think especially in the United States, where we're used to a very stable geographical tradition, we like our maps simple and clear cut. We clear boundaries, clear, discernible, sensible shaped regions, and by and large, Europe has a lot more of that now, and we certainly enjoy that. But the truth of the matter is that historically speaking, it's hard to find any area, even in Europe, that was more complicated geographically than the Holy Roman Empire, and that really is due to the Germanic traditions of fathers dividing their territories, including rulers, among their sons. So in the year 1000, the Holy Roman Empire looked roughly like this, but these are really just the major regions. Though the feudalism and the territorial divisions into manors, etc., that happened with feudalism um, was less well developed here. And for some ways, the dividing was more developed in the feudal concentration of land in the hands of certain powerful rulers. Feudalism developed first in France and then spread to Germany. Right. The uh, the fact of the matter is that dividing instinct is very strong in the German culture, especially in the tribal kind of chieftain-ruled German culture that tended to be true of that region before Charlemagne and periodically, episodically, and just kind of culturally for a long time afterwards. In fact, by 1400, this is the actual map of what the Holy Roman Empire looked like, with all those different regions being essentially different or quasi-independent states. And that's what a Holy Roman Emperor was supposed to be controlling. Keep in mind also, of course, he's elected, an elected emperor trying to control all these different independent or quasi-independent states. This is what is meant by the term German particularism. And throughout German history and long past the time period that we're specifically looking at, that tradition of having lots of different regions with, quite jealous of their own regional prerogatives, regional rights, is a constant enemy of the kind of centralizing power. Of course, in America, we have a tradition of regional identity of politics in our states, and at least a suspicion of too much centralized power as well. So it's not just places like Germany or the Holy Roman Empire, but it's a pretty exaggerated case historically for them. All right, now remember, Charlemagne's empire itself, when divided by the time of his grandsons into three kingdoms between Charles the Bald, Lothar, and Louis the German, these three grandsons of his, right? This is really where the kind of major divisions can be seen, right? And keep in mind, right, by the time the Holy Roman Empire starts, the descendants of those sectional kingdoms have already died out, right? But only just previously. And the Holy Roman Empire is really sort of the child of the easternmost section, the one that comes from Louis the German, but absorbing the central kingdom of Lothar, at least most of it, right? And so it's not hard to see that as you move from this map over here, right, into the Holy Roman Imperial map for the year 1000, that you see essentially that Eastern kingdom, this Eastern Frankish kingdom, having absorbed the kingdom of Lothar, by and large, including these Italian sections, right, and then pushing into the east, all these kind of striped regions, right, are part of the Drang nach Osten. My German's not great, sorry about that, right, which means the driving into the east. That is a long-standing habit from the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire until all the way until let's face it, in the 1930s and 40s when Hitler was pushing eastward. It was, he of course was a military dictator and a tyrant, but he was following a pattern that was familiar historically to German history, right? So this is the foundational kind of identity of where the Holy Roman Empire comes from, right? Now, in terms of talking, just to try to make an attempt at simplifying the dynasties, this may not look super simple to you, but in some ways, this page right here is sort of our chapter in summary. I mean, it begins with, of course, Otto the Great, who established the Holy Roman Empire. Although the name came later, essentially, he's the one that is first after Charlemagne crowned, king of the Romans. Bringing back this kind of, seeing himself as, though not the direct heir of Charlemagne in that sense, at least picking up the mantle from where it had been left off by his fragmented descendants, and from his, and following in the dynastic footsteps of his father, who had been elected ruler of the Germans, to become a pretty effective emperor, right? And reestablishing this sense of empire, including, of course, northern Italy, by bringing in, defending a queen under siege and marrying her and incorporating her lands and crown into this larger empire, right? Being crowned by the Pope, a grateful Pope whose defense he had come to as King of the Romans. He's kind of picking back up that mantle. We keep seeing this sense, any sense really of empire, it always echoes back to the Romans. And these people don't think of themselves as Romans. It's especially true of Otto. Although later, that sense that maybe they are in a certain sense kind of Romans in a different way does come in to the empire. But foundationally, it's a German empire, right? As established by Otto, but taking up the mantle that Charlemagne had taken from the previous concept of empire being passed along, right? Now, the next dynasty, the Franconian dynasty, we've already talked about, especially with Henry IV, if you recall, the emperor who had to, after coming into conflict with the Pope, Gregory VII, had to meet him at Canossa and wait for days to be forgiven. He ran afoul of the strength of the church, right? But from the beginning, really, there's always a need for elected monarchs to have the church behind them, even more than other monarchs. And all the other monarchs throughout Europe are trying to do the same kind of thing, essentially, at this point. But the Germans have a particular need for it because they are an elected monarchy, because in trying to build up power and strength or establish dynasties, they don't have as much to be that they can count on, right? And there are so many different territories and so many different types of rulers who, once again, as we said, jealous of their own regional powers, that they're fighting quite a lot, and at the same time trying to live up to quite a lot, right? So, this is one reason why you see so many of the emperors trying to exert not only to make the church their friend in a sense, but to exert power over the church. For example, appointing bishops and abbots, because that's a way of trying to make the church a guaranteed friend and making sure that the church backs them and supports them. And it runs, of course, these emperors and other kings we'll see soon in afoul of the church and oftentimes directly with the Pope. But this is why this whole investiture controversy and the investiture instinct comes up with these rulers. Is that it's the natural way that a feudal monarch, especially an elected one here, is going to try to guarantee that the church is behind him. Right now, with Henry V, he, and I have it within quotes here, ended the investiture controversy, although of course it kept cropping back up as well later on, with the Concordat of Worms is how you pronounce the name. In German, W's sound like a V for us. And yeah, that looks weird to us, but it's the name of a city, Worms, right? So that's why it's called that. And you'll find, it's true throughout German history that they didn't just have typically one capital city. There are lots of different cities that might be used as a place for the Diet, which is their equivalent of Parliament, to gather. A particular city such as Aachen, which is the traditional city for coronation. This is, of course, going back to memories of Charlemagne, right? There are other cities where later on it's traditional to hold the gathering that will elect the emperor. So there's typically not just one city, right? The earliest dynasty here that is from Saxony. As the arrow shows us, this northern, highly northern region of Germany. By the time we get the Franconian dynasty, they're from obviously Franconia, right? A somewhat more southerly region. The Hohenstaufens, such as Frederick Barbarossa, is from he was born in Swabia, although the origin of his family is a little bit more in historical doubt. He was born here in this duchy, right? And ended the feud between the Hohenstaufens and the Welfs because his mother was of the other side. So, and it became, as the book emphasizes, dynamic, legendary, crusading emperor. Running into conflict with the Pope. And keep in mind, this is after Henry IV, but battling back from it, diplomatically earning his way back into the good graces, and pushing forward again, and only being stopped by the accident that he had in a river on crusade, and drowning in the river. Now, becoming a legendary figure, much like as the book points out, Arthur, where the legend has it that he's not really dead, that he'll be coming back, when his land needs him, right? And frankly, fighting alongside another king that's pretty legendary for England, which is Richard the Lionheart. The good King Richard that we hear about with all the tales of Robin Hood when they're bemoaning bad King John, they're looking for the return of his brother, good King Richard, right? So this is a time of a lot of these sort of legendary kings, right? Now, moving past the Hohenstaufens, we get to the dynasty that really gets and holds on to this reign for an astoundingly long amount of time. Rudolph of Habsburg, and the book spells it with a B, Habsburg. Many, in fact, probably most, spell it with a P, Habsburg. So you'll see both. Don't worry, it's the same family. Right now, at this point, Rudolph isn't once again the ups and downs of the strength of the monarchy. He's not able to do a lot except for take over one of the primary territories of the empire, and that is Austria. And the capital of Austria is Vienna, right? But and he does so after a 20-something year vacancy following Frederick Barbarossa, right? But his dynasty, though it's not totally continuous from the late 1200s, from the middle 1400s all the way until the abolishing of the empire in 1806 by Napoleon, only his family members are elected emperor. And frankly, from there, for more than 100 years, his family continues on the imperial tradition as the Austro-Hungarian emperors, based in this old family-centered area of Austria, and adding to it their kingdom, the kingdom of Hungary that they had conquered and ruled directly, right? And long before that, around the time of the discovery of America, shortly thereafter, Charles V, Habsburg, was not only Holy Roman Emperor, he was also King of Spain. He ruled all these sections of northern Italy, and through his Spanish grandparents, grandfather, he ruled southern Italy as well, and huge sections of North America. In fact, more territory than anyone since the Caesars, right? But he found it so difficult to do that he abdicated the throne and broke up the territories between his brother, who he gave the Austrian imperial territories, and his son, who he gave Spain as well as the New World, right? So now, the book doesn't tell you about all of that. I just wanted to point out that though the book emphasizes the weakness of the Habsburgs, the fact is the weakness is more of a systemic weakness, and you can see it with the ups and downs. Every once in a while, you have somebody like a Frederick Barbarossa or an Otto the Great who founds the empire, but there's really just a foundational difficulty in having an elected monarchy and such a fragmented situation on the map and such high aspirations as to try to reestablish this broad territorial situation of lingering back to the ideas of an empire that frankly covers more than the Romans had ever ruled. In Roman history, when Rome had gotten into the southern areas that we would call Germany, right? They already were finding difficulty in using their renowned armies to conquer any more, to hold on to any more, right? So there's just a lot of difficulty in trying to gain a lot of territory and rule lots of disparate lands, right? So this German particularism, because it's the structure, not the weakness necessarily of the Habsburgs or any of the dynasties, but just because of the structure of the system, it was very hard, even for strong emperors, to really kind of counteract this elective monarchy as a system. Now, just touching on this, there's a constant struggle that we've read about, between the Holy Roman Emperors versus the Italian city-states versus the popes. And why is that? I mean, I think if we could have sort of zoom in here on the map, we can kind of see why. That if we have the papal states here and all the German territories above, the Holy Roman Emperors coming back in and trying to take over these northern Italian sections that had been all the way back to Lothar, part of the empire, so to speak, right? That naturally those people in between don't really like it, right? And so these Italian city-states like Venice that we find here, right? Or Milan, or Genoa, or Pisa, or Siena, right? They naturally, for their own interests, sometimes take the side of the popes if there's a struggle between the emperor and the popes, or the side of the emperor in other cases, depending on the city, depending on the time, the case. Right? Why? But well, primarily so they can kind of play both sides against the middle and try to carve out as much autonomy for themselves as they can maintain, as they can hold on to. Right? The popes, for their part, begin by, as we see with Otto, endorsing the emperor. They like a strong emperor trying to reestablish order to defend them from their own Roman nobles many times, or from just the kind of chaotic infighting, sort of struggling back and forth between the Italian city-states, right? But what they don't like is when the emperors start trying to exert or claim control over the church, whether it's over the church in their own lands in Germany or over the church in general once they're crowned emperor, right? There's that sense that German emperors, these Holy Roman emperors, once they become emperor, are trying to do some things that aren't that terribly different than what the Byzantine emperors were trying to do. Or let's face it, some of the ancient Roman emperors did similar things as well, trying to exert control and influence over the church for the sake of strengthening the state. Right? So all these imperial traditions have had that same instinct. Some were able to enforce it, like the Byzantine emperors, much more than the Holy Roman emperors, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? And for the emperors, what's their motivation in this kind of three-way struggle? Well, they want to be allied with the church, right? Because it's a unique source of sanctified authority. And they also want to be able to appoint bishops and abbots to ensure that the church influence is siding with them. But they also, as the book points out, believe that there are rex et sacerdos, right? Which means king and priest, right? And therefore that it's their right to rule that way. This is a lot like, the sort of the instinctual ideas of what you saw in the Byzantine emperors, right? Now, eventually we get to the Golden Bull of 1356, and this tries to resolve, in fact, it manages to regularize the way, to fix the way that emperors are elected, so you can avoid things that had sometimes happened where a group of nobles would gather together and elect one emperor, but another group had gathered in a different place and elected a contesting candidate as emperor, right? To avoid that, the emperor at this point fixes, forevermore. There's one slight change that happens later on, but we don't have to touch on that now. The way that they will gather specific men who rule specific areas of Germany to serve as electors whenever there's a need for a new emperor, right? That three of them would come from the church: Archbishop of Mainz, Cologne, and Trier, and four of them would be secular rulers: the King of Bohemia, the Count Palatinate of the Rhine, Duke of Saxony, and the Margrave of Brandenburg. Right? Now, notice, popes have been excluded here, right? Even though it was Otto and Charlemagne both became king of the Romans because the Pope had crowned them so, right? Here, by this point, any kind of, with all the competition between emperors and popes, the popes directly have been excluded, right? Now you have three archbishops, but not the Pope, right? And you still notice, even though it's a regularized process, you still have this. It's actually kind of cementing in that German habit of elective monarchy, which is going to eventually ensure that this empire is weak and it remains weaker as its neighboring kingdoms eventually grow stronger, right? For what it's worth, also, and the book doesn't mention this in this chapter, as we're foreshadowing a little bit, but neither Germany nor Italy would ever achieve national union in a way that other areas of Europe did, in the way that we kind of consider normal. Neither one of them became unified single nations ever in history until 1870, almost 100 years after the United States, right? And a lot of the roots of that go back to the Italian city-state traditions and their kind of fierce independence between each other, and the German instinct, that only being fought really by these emperors to create some kind of unity, right? So the influence of this time period, though it seems like so long ago, has come up till quite recently. Right now, back to the quip that we started with. The French wit Voltaire is the one who first called the Holy Roman Empire neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. And of course, I mean, like many a French wit, especially in the late 1700s, he was very devastating with his humor, right? And in a way, because it touches on something that's true, but it's also not in a very fair spirit, right? Now, why neither holy? Well, of course, you look at the list of rulers of any country, and you'll find plenty of examples of people who aren't holy, right? Um, Nor Roman. Well, they're not Roman, they're German, right? They're Roman. It is in a Romanized sense the way that all of Western civilization inherits from the Roman world or the Greek world, but are generally not Roman or Greek in a very thoroughgoing way, right? Nor an empire. Well, like if you think of empire as the kind of unquestioned command of the military and the politics, back to the first Roman emperors. Well, okay, yeah, definitely not empire in that same sense, and not an empire in the modern, sort of dictatorial sense either, right? But I think it's probably more fair to say, on the whole, that the efforts of the Holy Roman Emperors and the empires in general, in a Christian way, were actually trying to be holy, trying to be Roman in this sort of Roman by expansion sense, especially through the Roman faith, of the Latin speaking Christian faith, and an empire in a kind of different, frankly, Germanic understanding of what that would mean, right? And so, it's a famous quip. It can help us remember some of the details about the Holy Roman Empire, but, maybe not totally fair. All right, guys. I think that wraps up the chapter for us. Just let me say here that clearly, it's different us having a full chapter to do all at once, but this and the next chapter are both relatively shorter and relatively easier to manage in terms of the number of terms involved. So we're going to try to pull in a bit more here before we wrap things up. I hope everything's going well and that the system for doing our notes is working pretty well. It seems to be working well for you guys. I hope all of you are doing well at home. I know we're tired of having to be, stuck at home, but I hope everything's good, and we will be talking soon. Talk to you later.